what the Germans did with this federal agency, I will give you the name, it's a very long name, maybe as complicated as the task that we set out to do 20 years ago. But what it really turned out to be 20 years later is a model of how you can come to terms with a very dark chapter that you are all facing, that lots of the Eastern European countries faced, and that many of the Arab countries are facing, the legacy of a secret police that supported the dictatorships and the oppression. It was the tool, it was at the center of the regimes of fear that kept people sort of oppressed and under the powers of a dictator. So what I'm hoping to show you to a certain degree is that the way we try to organize dealing with the legacy of the secret police can be a model for all of you, and ultimately a tool for democracy, because that's what it really has become in Germany. So it really is not necessarily called the Stasi archives. The official title of this agency, which even to a German ear is hard to remember, it's the Federal Commissioner for the Records of the State Security of the former German Democratic Republic. So it's a three-line title that nobody can really remember. So we call it the Stasi Records Agency, and it has a federal commissioner who every 10 years has been renewed so far, and has always been an East German that was part of the opposition movement to a larger or smaller degree. So the Stasi Records Agency has been, in effect, has been working by January of 2012 for 20 years. And it came out of the revolution, the peaceful revolution of the fall of 1989, when the Eastern Germans took to the streets and they demanded freedom of expression, freedom to assemble, and most importantly to them, because they had been stuck behind a wall for 28 years at that point, the freedom to travel. So within a few weeks, those demonstrations led to the fall of the wall, which we, as we know now, was the beginning of the end of the Cold War. One of the most important, or one of the many slogans that was given out in those days by the people was to each their own records, or freedom for my record. And these records referred to what the Stasi, the German short word for state security, has compiled or had compiled over 38 years of its existence in their archives. So the Stasi was really the instrument that kept people in check, and that made everybody sort of be afraid, and created that climate of fear that made the freedom of expression, the freedom to report, and in this particular German instance, even the freedom to travel, impossible. So yeah, and it seems quite logical that then the Stasi became really a focus of how to come to terms with 40 years of a communist one-party rule. There were, in the very end of 1989, about 91,000 employees in the state security, or in the Stasi, and over 180,000 unofficial collaborators. Those were regular citizens that informed on their neighbors, friends, colleagues at work, and that was really a specific tool of the German state security, even though that was happening in many of the other countries. There's worse words than unofficial collaborators or informants, you can call them snitches. And that was really what was the most effective tool in creating a system of fear. You would never know if who you would talk to would actually report what you said to the state security. So you rather kept shut, you rather put up with what the situation was, you created your own private life, and you would hope that we'd never show up in the network of the Stasi. So these unofficial collaborators created also a big problem, as you might think, after the fall of the wall. And there is something that makes Germany very unique from the rest of Eastern Europe, and obviously also now in the Arab world. The singular, unique circumstance of the peaceful revolution of East Germany is the fact that there was a West Germany. So within less than a year after that peaceful revolution, there was unification. That was less than 1 year. And with unification, there was a fairly quick access to 40 years of, I would say, reasonably functioning democracy of West Germany. And with the West Germans came their legal systems and their ideas, and a practice of administration and a legal system that basically was just thrown over to the East, and they had to accept it for better or worse. There was times when the East Germans felt they really didn't have a chance to participate in the process and bring in their ideas that they had expressed on the streets in the peaceful revolution. But in terms of coming to terms with the past, that whole idea of creating a legal process and looking at the documents was very helpful in terms of having a West German system coming in and bringing democracy and really bringing a system of functioning democracy from elections to administration to a judicial system. So in that sense, the East Germans really had a shortcut, because a lot of the Eastern European countries, after their revolutions, after their first free elections and turnover, it took them anywhere from 7, 8, 9 to 10 years to actually face the dark chapter of the secret police and figure out how to deal with it. So the Germans, in their thoroughness and with the help of a system that instantly made them sort of a Western democracy, had a much easier task, I shall say. And I'm emphasizing that because it takes a lot of time. And even with this Western help that brought in a functioning democracy, it took 2 years after the storming of the Stasi headquarters, which, by the way, pictures that look a lot like what happened in Cairo when they stormed their secret police headquarters. It took about 2 years from the storming to the opening of our agency in the January of 1992. So in terms of lessons learned, I would sort of give a little bit of a mix of guidelines and the process, how you might want to accompany it. I think at the center of the German idea is that access to these files is paramount. You want to keep them open. There was a lot of discussion. There was a lot of worry that when you open them up, when you make that information available, people are going to be at each other's throat. They're going to be revengeful. They want, you know, the Stasi messed up lives. But the mere fact that you wanted to leave East Germany, you might end up in jail for 3 years. Your family will be split. Your children, in cases, have been put up for adoption. Your whole life was completely manipulated and changed around. You might not have advanced in your career because you might have said something as a student that somebody didn't like, that somebody reported to the Stasi. You never finished your degree. You never achieved your professional goal. For years, you were just kept in the dark, that it wasn't your inability, but it was somebody in that whole system of surveillance that decided you are not fit to be a citizen that can fulfill their own dreams. So all these sad and disrupted life stories are in these files, so by making it publicly available and finding out who did what, the fear was there will be revenge. Let's just throw this all away, just burn it up, and then we'll be left alone. The past cannot be left alone, it'll come back. If you throw away the files, there will still be the people that know what happened, and it'll become their knowledge only, and they can use it at their discretion, and that's never good. For a democracy, it's important to know. So at the center of our idea of the agencies, we need to know what happened exactly. We need to know who did what and why, who is responsible, how did the mechanism work. Most importantly, also at the core of the idea, it was the citizens who took to the street, and it was the citizens who stormed the headquarters of the Stasi and said, we want to make sure that these files don't disappear. We want to reclaim what you took from us. Most of this information was amassed against human rights. You know, you didn't know that they were listening on your phone. Almost every single letter that was sent from East Germany abroad was photographed and copied and read through, looked for information. All of this is even by East German standard, was illegal. You had you know, the Postal Secrecy Act. You were not allowed to look into mail. So all of this information was around, and the people said to each their own record, freedom for my record. I want to find out. So at the heart of this process was also to give them back their dignity, to give them back their lost lives by at least knowing what happened, who manipulated. You don't need to know, but you should be able to. You can leave these files where they are, but also for the Germans it was important that then every single person can only actually his or her own file if they were a victim of the system. So, so you need, you know, if we want to give you back your dignity, we also want to make sure that it doesn't become public knowledge to just anybody, because you have the control over who reads it, and if only you want to read it, so be it, that's all fine. If you never want to read it, that's fine, nobody else can access that too. So the information, though, about the perpetrators, though that were officially employees of the state security or the hundreds and thousands of unofficial collaborators, this is open to journalists and researchers on the basis of a law. We created the Stasi records law, which is in equal measurement a freedom of information law. It grants you the access to the information in these files, but it's as much a protection of privacy law, that if you were spied upon by the secret police, you control the information. That means, in essence, as a researcher or a journalist, if you want to find out how the Stasi tried to manipulate certain economic fields, East-West German relationships and so forth, you will get files that contain general information. You will get files that will contain names of officers of the state security and unofficial collaborators with their cover names. But if there's irregular citizens that were spied upon, it'll be blackened out. It's anonymized. It's a huge amount of work for us to hand out these files and keep the balance between accessing information and protecting the privacy of people. There's really, as sort of a recommendation, there's no one way to do it. The ingredients for Germany were special. The Eastern European countries took a much longer time. They're much more lenient about the law. The idea of privacy is to Germany, which is sort of coming to terms with the second dictatorship after the Nazi time, a very important issue. We consider this a very paramount issue, so we were very protective of personal information. In some of the other countries, in the Czech Republic, anybody can read anything that's in these files. At the same time, though, also, we've been able to manage to keep a huge amount of the files. The state security, just like in the Arab countries now, destroyed many of the files. Still, the citizens' committees that guarded the offices and the headquarters were able to guard the amounts of paper till we would figure out what to do with it, and we were able to really keep the largest archive of all the Eastern European countries on that one. So most importantly, the turmoil of the revolution and the impatience and the desire to get something done, to take out the names and confront those responsible for injustices, all you need to do is really make sure that the papers don't disappear. Make sure you control the access. You make sure that nobody throws out and destroys the evidence of a past system that oppressed a lot of people. And I think that it's important that you figure out how you want to control then the access to the files, and that only happens once you figured out how your society should look like, how your democracy will look like. So we, as the Stasi Records Agency, can be considered a model, and we've had visitors in the last couple of months, many from Arab. I've seen at least one person that has been here at the agency to figure out how we do it. So we're happy to give you an idea of how we organize it, how the law works, how we, for instance, reconstruct torn files that we have 15,000 of in Sachs. So all of that is available, but in the end, you in your respective countries and societies need to figure out how much you want to make this information available to whom and under which conditions. So even now, 22 years later, in Germany, that has had it much easier with the unification, there's still a big discussion on how much we should still take into consideration whether somebody was working for the state security or not. Most recently, this law has been amended for the 8th time, and it was decided by the Bundestag, the German parliament, that the vetting of public officials in their connection to the state security will be continued until 2019. So for the next 8 years, high-ranking public official can be sort of vetted through our agency, through us looking into the records to make sure they were never unofficial collaborators with the state security. Some people feel that too much time has passed, I don't need to know anymore, it's done with. The argument that many of the lawmakers were making is if somebody had lied 20 years ago, he will be rewarded for his lie, versus those that were vetted at the time, and we would find out when somebody didn't find them employable in a state function. I'm not talking about private industry, but in the end, I think the essence of this process, of what we learned from it, that to understand the mechanism of dictatorship, to make all these files transparent, to look at how it worked, how, in the case of Germany, people put up with being behind a wall for 28 years, why it took them 40 years to get to the street and speak up, you know, why for 40 years they kept their mouths shut and didn't dare to speak up. In these files lie a lot of answers, complicated, hurtful answers, but it's what we need, because also, if you understand the mechanism of dictatorship, if you understand how freedom, how the restriction of freedom works, in German you would say unfreedom, how unfreedom works, it'll enable you to better participate, cherish, and defend the democracy you're all on the road to hopefully get. Thank you.